We're back, and we're continuing a very important, very timely conversation with one of the leading forces in our Committee on the Present Danger, China, and I think one of the country's preeminent experts on the mortal threat we face from that quarter, the Chinese Communist Party. Dr. Bradley Thayer is his name. He is the author of How China Sees the World, Han Centrism, and the Balance of Power in International Relations. Brad, one of the things that the Han supremacists in Beijing are clearly focused on is what you've described as our western border. And I think if Americans think of that at all, they probably think of, well, maybe California and the Pacific Northwest. You've pointed out that actually our border is much further removed from the continental United States and much closer to China. Walk us through that and the threats that you now see arising from this, well, growing kinetic warfare capability of China, as well as its other unrestricted warfare elements.
Thank you, Frank. Yes, we recognize that our borders are under threat. The southern border rightfully receives attention. It should receive more, of course, but we're also under a different type of threat on our western border, particularly to Guam, a United States territory. We're obligated clearly to defend it. It's a very important base for the Navy, for the Air Force, and for other military and other assets that the United States has. It's under direct threat, first from the development of Chinese missiles, medium, intermediate range missiles, of course, Chinese strategic capabilities, the great growth in their cruise missile capabilities, and even new developments, including essentially an air launched ballistic missile. Equally importantly, Frank, the Chinese are outflanking Guam through their expansion in Melanesia and Polynesia. So if we consider, if we think mentally of a map of the Pacific, we can see to the south of Guam and to the southwest of Guam, Chinese influence is expanding. Kiribati, Tonga, as you've noted many times, of course, the Solomon Islands rightfully is receiving significant attention due to the Chinese agreement with that country. So we
Albeit
have a western
belatedly
border.
so.
Indeed, we have a western border, and it's under threat not from migrants crossing the border, but from our enemy,
Mhm.
the People's Republic of China, which is threatening, of course, Guam, Hawaii, Alaska, indeed the United States in toto. Through its strategic capabilities and other mechanisms. But Guam is on the front line and it's poorly defended from Chinese missile capabilities, whether they're hypersonic cruise missiles or ballistic missile capabilities. It's a very valuable asset, which, if we were to lose it in any type of conflict, it would greatly complicate our ability to reassure our allies, to continue our extended deterrent, and to defeat the Chinese Communist Party
Yeah,
in any
and
type of.
losing it might not involve its actual seizure by the Chinese, though that's something that probably can't be ruled out, but simply its neutralization by this accumulated capability. And you mentioned hypersonic missiles, and now apparently a new generation of air-launched ballistic missiles capable of precision anti-ship as well as anti-island or fixed target attacks. And when you think about this, Brad, together with this sort of island hopping campaign, to use a term that was coined for MacArthur's liberation of the Pacific in World War II, the Chinese are moving inexorably, it seems, not just into and through the first island chain, but are now very much obtaining a capability to neutralize, as we said, the second island chain. And again, from a strategic point of view, for the geographically challenged among us, why is that so important, both to, Hawaii, among other places, and to our interests in the Pacific more generally?
Indeed, to Alaska, Hawaii, other U.S. territories. But very importantly, Frank, as you well know from your time in the Pentagon, the lines of communication. sea
Mhm.
lines of communication, airlines of communication to Japan, to Korea, to Taiwan, to the Philippines, New Zealand, and Australia are threatened by the Chinese outflanking of Guam and their growing influence in Polynesia and Melanesia.
Yeah.
To
Let me
our
just interrupt for a second because sea lines of communication is a term of art, I think, in the military in particular. It's not just about, being able to talk to people. It's about actually conducting commercial relations. It's about the transit of waters or access to what's underneath them or the air overseas. But also, very much vital to our interests that we have those kinds of slocks, as they're called, inviolable. But that's not the case any longer, it seems, and ever less so with the Chinese buildup. Is that right?
Indeed, we're making the assumption that the SLOCs are going to are not going to be negatively affected. The Chinese aren't going to
Mhm.
be able to cut them. What we're witnessing now is the Chinese, again, this is the flowering of their strategy. They
Yes.
planned this for a long time, and now it's coming to pass. Are going to be able to interdict our ability to resupply our forces, our allies, and to project power
Hmm.
in the Indo-Pacific. So it's a way of, as they're doing in space, as they're doing in other areas, it's a way of targeting us and to destroy our ability to project power and to damage and ultimately, if it comes to it, to destroy the United States in any type of conflict. So it's a very worrisome development that does not receive the attention that it warrants as these events are
Yes.
developing.
Let me ask you quickly about one other piece of this, Brad, and we talk about it with you and others in this program incessantly because I think it's absolutely of paramount importance that we understand not only what you've just said about the comprehensiveness of the Chinese threat and its buildup, military and otherwise, but also the extent to which we are actually enabling it by investing in Chinese corporations, some of them actually directly engaged in the acquisition for the People's Liberation Army of weapon systems of the kind that you're talking about are likely to be used against us. And I want just very quickly to ask you about specifically a problem that has just emerged, which is an effort being made by something called the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board with its principal manager, Larry Fink of BlackRock, to get federal government employees, past and present, to have their personal retirement savings invested in some of these Chinese companies. Just very quickly, we got a minute. How serious a mistake would that be? And more generally, how important is it that we stop underwriting our enemy, Brad?
It's a profound mistake. It is a strategic error of the first order that the United States is allowing and funding the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese military. The word foolish, the word myopic, they simply don't begin to describe the depths of this mistake. And it needs
Amen.
to be reversed, Frank, as we're attempting to do, of course, and others are as well. But it's a profound mistake, and it calls into question many other issues. So the quality of our strategic leadership,
Mhm.
the interest of Wall Street in supporting the rise and the growth of China, even though it's detrimental to us. So, at a time when our western border is threatened by Chinese military capabilities, our southern border is threatened by China through fentanyl,
Yes.
precursor chemicals, other counterfeit goods, as well as narcotics
Mhm.
that the Chinese are sending through the southern border.
They're
We have
money
Wall
laundering for the cartels, among other things. And Brad, these are several points that I'm thrilled that you've mentioned because we're going to talk more about them with our next guest, Buck Revell, a former FBI agent and leader. I thank you for your time today, my friend. Come back to us again with updates very soon, if you would.
My
Thanks
pleasure,
up.
Frank.
Buck Revell on all of this and more straight ahead.